Hello, I'm Ludivine Gegaden. I'm an associate at Lewis Silkin in the UK.
And Burkard Göpfert from Cleamed Arbeitsrecht in Germany.
Hi Burkard, how are you?
Good to see you.
So we just had a very interesting discussion on artificial intelligence and how it impacts relationships in the workplace. We covered a broad range of topics, but what are your 5 key takeaways from this session?
5 key takeaways, all right. So I think we all start to look at this from very different angles. We all look at changes in the workplace in the first place. So how do employment relationships change? How do tasks change? Do tasks become differently in the future? And how fast will these changes be? And then of course we look at the second step into, what does it mean to actually work with an artificial intelligence, and what are the upsides and the downsides, the risks. I think in Europe, when we have this kind of discussion, of course we look very much at potential discrimination, potential bias, and we tend to have traditionally a more skeptical view to new technology, whereas outside of Europe, maybe there is a more positive and proactive way of dealing with it. And then fourth point is of course regulation, because there's an abundance of regulation on the European level, on global level, on local level, regional, whatever. And finally, I think it's the impact on workplaces as a whole for industry. So what are the potential dramatic changes that we are facing in our industrial models back here in Europe mainly?
It's really interesting, and I'll come back to the point of discrimination because I find it very fascinating. At first sight, we think that introducing AI, where you have a technology, you're going to avoid bias. You're not having a human, so you're going to avoid bias, you're going to have discrimination because you're introducing some objectivity. But we've seen in our talk today that actually even AI, even artificial intelligence can discriminate. And we've talked about a few cases, the Amazon case and the Uber Eats case, and it's just really incredible to see that even a technology can discriminate. And then how do we cope with that, and how do we decide who has made a decision? How do we justify that decision when people might not understand how the technology came to that decision in the first place?
Well, I think we have to understand that artificial intelligence is not an artificial intelligence, but it's a statistical tool. And all it does is to create algorithms of existing information. It doesn't create new information immediately, but it enhances existing information in a rapid and breathtaking manner. And of course, all the biases that we have as human beings will immediately be transported by kind of a even majority opinion, because the majority of information will have an impact. Like if you go on Google, we need to understand that the bias we have as human beings will immediately be visible, transported in this technology. And I think the key takeaway is, in the end, very basic ground rules. One is that key decisions in an employment relationship need to be taken by human beings, even taking into account all the biases these people will have and the necessary checks and balances, or minimum decisions that will be taken by a machine will have to be at least a point where an employee can have these decisions checked by a human being. And these are very basic ground rules that will be necessary in works agreements, in employment agreements, in union agreements, and for the lawmakers. I think what is particularly interesting is how fast these rules are being developed. I mean, we see this on the OECD level. We are in discussion with the OECD, with our policy group of Ius Laboris. We see this on the EU level with new regulations coming out basically by the day, and on the national level. And I think it's almost difficult to understand for a normal company or even an employee to understand what are the real rules that are applicable to this when it comes to my personal situation. I think one of the tasks of legal professionals in the future will be to, you know, derive those key elements from all these regulations and make clear, you know, whatever the rights and rules are that actually are applicable on the shop floor and on the workplace.
It's interesting because the law seems to be playing a bit of a catch-up as well, because the AI is already being used, already everywhere. Absolutely. In the workplace, yeah. But we don't yet have all the regulations around it, and we're kind of trying to find what regulations would work with the use that we need it for as well. How we can, do you regulate too much or not enough, and how do you find the right balance?
Well, I even think, you know, we have already a lot of regulation, yeah? I think we need to understand how we apply them, yeah? If you look at the EU level, for example, the new Platform Workers Directive has an abundant set of rules on the usage of AI. I think it's the most breathtaking law that the EU has passed in the last years. Very forward-looking, but also very consultation-friendly. It's European laws in the end, yeah, and after all. And so I think we have these rules. We have to make them manageable on the workplace, and this will require transition into works agreements, maybe labor agreements with unions. We see major companies, at least I can say this from my German perspective, major companies like IBM, for example, or SAP, looking into these kind of global regulations to make it more tangible for individual employees what it means to work with an AI. Something that I see with a bit of a concern though, yeah, is that in all the restructurings that are currently being announced, if you look at the underlying measures, you see very little measures that are immediately, directly linked to the use of AI, replacing workforce. And this does not connect with an experience that a group of our Ius Laboris network had recently in India, when we were traveling to see our Indian partners, and we could see that basically every worldwide company has an Indian subsidiary and work very closely with the Indian IT teams on the implementation of AI, because it's faster, it has less transaction cost, it's less regulated, and so we have some, you know, under the surface, yeah, we have something going on that may come as a shock to us within the next 3 to 5 years, because once this is implemented and translates into outsourcing deals by major German and European companies, then there will be a huge impact on the workplace. Not because the individual work will be replaced by AI, but because the work will no longer be performed out of European countries, but rather out of India, for example. And I don't blame them, because I just think they use this as a wonderful opportunity to tell us to become more efficient, more faster in the way we implement these tools. So I encourage, and that's maybe my key takeaway from what we have seen here, is we have to lift the curtain of a more skeptical, maybe even defensive way of looking at this. It's a survival factor to implement AI tools and to swiftly implement them in Europe. Otherwise, you know, we may be simply too late.
Need to embrace it, understand it, and use it to our advantage.
Yeah, and I think we need to be very swift. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you.